My dad's new wife wants me to call her Mom. I exposed her real reason at Thanksgiving. I never thought I'd be the person to ruin Thanksgiving dinner, but when my dad's new wife pushed me too far, I had no choice but to expose the truth that would change everything. My name is Jake, I'm 17 years old, and this is the story of how I discovered my stepmom's real intentions and got the revenge that was 3 years in the making. What started as an innocent request to call her mom turned into a calculated scheme that almost cost my family everything. Stick around, because this gets wild, and the ending? You won't see it coming. Trust me when I say that Thanksgiving will forever be remembered as the day our family's secrets came crashing down in the most spectacular way possible. Let me take you back to where this all started, 3 years ago when my real mom passed away from cancer. It was the hardest thing I had ever been through, watching her fade away over 18 months while she fought with everything she had. My dad was devastated, completely broken, and for about 6 months after Mom died, our house felt like a tomb where happiness went to die. I was 14 at the time, trying to process my grief while also watching my father crumble into someone I barely recognized. Then, one day, Dad came home with this huge smile on his face, the first real smile I'd seen since Mom's diagnosis, and he told me he'd met someone named Catherine at a grief support group. At first, I was actually happy for him, because seeing my dad smile again felt like a miracle after months of darkness. Catherine seemed nice enough when I first met her, always bringing cookies and asking about my day with what felt like genuine interest. She'd talk about her own loss, how she'd lost her husband in a car accident 5 years prior, and how she understood our pain. Dad fell for her hard and fast, and honestly, I understood why, because she seemed to bring light back into his life when everything had been so dark. Within 6 months, they were engaged, and 8 months after that, she moved into our house as Mrs. Catherine Morrison, my new stepmother. That's when things started to change, in ways so subtle at first that I thought I was imagining them. Catherine began rearranging the house, slowly removing pictures of my mom and replacing them with her own decorations and family photos. She'd make comments about how we needed to move forward and create new memories instead of dwelling on the past. The first time she asked me to call her Mom, I politely declined and said I'd prefer to call her Catherine. Her smile faltered for just a second before she recovered, but I saw something flash in her eyes that made my stomach turn. It was frustration, maybe even anger, and it was the first glimpse I got of who she really was beneath that sweet exterior. Over the next 2 years, Catherine's requests became more insistent, more demanding, and frankly, more manipulative than I ever could have imagined. She'd bring it up in front of my dad, saying things like, "Doesn't Jake love me enough to call me Mom?" Or, "I'm trying so hard to be a real family, but Jake keeps pushing me away." My dad would look at me with these disappointed eyes, and I felt like the bad guy, even though I was just trying to honor my actual mother's memory. Catherine started implementing new rules in the house, taking away privileges when I didn't comply with her wishes, and slowly isolating me from my dad's attention. She'd plan father-son activities and then suddenly need my dad's help with something urgent, leaving me sitting alone waiting for quality time that never came. The worst part was watching my dad transform from the man who understood my grief into someone who seemed to prioritize keeping his new wife happy over everything else. The turning point came about 3 months before that fateful Thanksgiving, when I accidentally overheard a phone conversation that changed everything. I'd come home early from school because of a half day and heard Catherine talking in the study, her voice low and conspiratorial in a way that made me freeze outside the door. She was talking to someone about finances, about my dad's money, and about how she just needed to secure her position in the family before moving forward with phase 2. My blood ran cold as I pressed my ear against the door, hearing her laugh about how easy it was to manipulate my dad, how grief made people so vulnerable and stupid. She actually used the word stupid to describe my father, the man who'd opened his heart and home to her when she claimed to be grieving and broken herself. I stood there in complete shock, my whole body shaking as the reality of our situation crashed down on me like a ton of bricks. Catherine wasn't some grieving widow who'd found love again. She was a con artist, a predator who targeted vulnerable widowers through grief support groups. She mentioned at least 2 other men she'd been cultivating relationships with before deciding my dad was the best mark because of his substantial savings and the life insurance money from my mom's death. The rage that filled me in that moment was unlike anything I'd ever felt, hot and consuming, and absolutely determined to protect my father from this woman. But I knew I couldn't just go to my dad with accusations, because Catherine had spent 2 years making herself indispensable to him, and he'd likely choose her word over mine. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I became a detective, gathering evidence with the patience and determination of someone who had everything to lose. I started recording conversations whenever Catherine was on the phone, using my smartphone hidden in strategic locations around the house. I found documents she'd hidden in her office, papers showing debts and bankruptcies under 3 different names that she'd never mentioned to my father. There were divorce records showing she'd been married 4 times, not widowed once like she claimed, and each marriage had ended with the husband claiming financial abuse and manipulation. I discovered she'd been slowly transferring small amounts of money from my dad's accounts into hidden ones under her maiden name, amounts small enough that he wouldn't notice, but that added up to over $40,000 over 2 years. The hardest part was pretending everything was normal while rage and betrayal burned inside me every single day without letting it show. I had to sit at dinner and watch her play the loving wife, had to listen to her manipulate my dad with sweet words and fake tears when things didn't go her way. She'd corner me sometimes when Dad wasn't around, and her mask would slip just enough for me to see the calculating coldness underneath all that fake warmth. She'd whisper threats about sending me to boarding school, about convincing my dad that I needed serious psychological help because I was still grieving inappropriately and becoming a danger to the family dynamic. Looking back, I realized she knew I was getting suspicious, and she was preparing to eliminate me as an obstacle to her ultimate goals of getting full access to my dad's assets. As Thanksgiving approached, Catherine announced she wanted to host a big family dinner with her relatives and my dad's family all together for the first time. She said it would be the perfect opportunity for Jake to finally accept me as his real mom in front of everyone who mattered. My dad thought it was a wonderful idea, and I watched him get excited about this big family gathering while my stomach twisted with anxiety and anticipation. I knew this was my chance, my moment to expose her in front of witnesses before she could completely destroy my father financially and emotionally. I spent weeks preparing, organizing all my evidence into a clear presentation, and even consulting with a lawyer my mom had been friends with to understand the legal implications of what I'd discovered. The night before Thanksgiving, I barely slept because I kept playing through scenarios of how the next day would go down. Part of me was terrified I was making a huge mistake, that maybe I'd misunderstood something and was about to humiliate my dad and destroy our family for nothing. But then I'd remember Catherine's cold laugh on those recordings, her casual cruelty when describing my father as her retirement plan, and my resolve would harden again. I'd hidden a laptop in the living room, already queued up with the recordings and documents, connected to the TV with a wireless setup that I could control from my phone. My hands were shaking as I got dressed that Thanksgiving morning, knowing that in a few hours, everything would either fall apart or finally start to heal. Thanksgiving Day arrived with Catherine in full performance mode, playing the perfect hostess with an enthusiasm that made me physically sick to watch. She'd invited about 20 people total, her sister and brother-in-law, some cousins, my dad's brother and his family, and a few family friends who'd known my parents for years. She kept touching my dad's arm, laughing at his jokes, and shooting me meaningful looks across the kitchen while mouthing "Mom" at me when no one else was watching. The pressure was mounting, and I could feel her building up to some big moment where she'd put me on the spot in front of everyone. As guests arrived and the house filled with the smell of turkey and the sound of conversation, I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, about to jump into unknown waters below. Dinner started normally enough, with everyone sitting around our extended dining table while Catherine played the gracious hostess to perfection. She'd cooked an amazing meal, I'll give her that much, and everyone was complimenting her cooking and her decorating and what a wonderful addition she was to our family. My dad kept beaming at her with this proud, loving expression that would have been sweet if I didn't know what I knew about her real character. About halfway through dinner, Catherine stood up with her wine glass and announced she wanted to make a toast, and I knew immediately that this was the moment. Her eyes locked onto mine with a challenge in them, daring me to resist what was coming, and I felt my heart rate spike as I reached for my phone under the table. Catherine's toast started sweet, talking about family and gratitude and how blessed she felt to be part of our lives now. Then she turned to me directly, her voice dripping with false emotion as she said, "And Jake, I know these years have been hard for you, losing your mother so young, but I want you to know I love you like my own son." The room went silent, everyone watching this supposedly tender moment unfold while I sat there with my jaw clenched. She continued, "I've been patient, I've been understanding, but today, on Thanksgiving, in front of all our family, I'm asking you one more time to please accept me as your mom and call me by that name that would mean so much to both your father and me." Tears were streaming down her face. My dad was getting emotional, and I could see family members nodding encouragingly at me, clearly expecting me to have some breakthrough moment and embrace her. I stood up slowly, and Catherine's face lit up with triumph, because she thought she'd finally backed me into a corner where I'd have to comply or look like a monster. Instead, I pulled out my phone, and with my hands surprisingly steady despite my racing heart, I said, "Before I answer that, I think everyone should know the truth about Catherine and why she really wants me to call her mom." The room went dead silent, the air suddenly thick with tension as people exchanged confused glances. Catherine's face went pale, then red, then pale again as she stammered, "Jake, what are you talking about? Don't be dramatic on a holiday." But I was already pressing buttons on my phone, and suddenly the TV in the adjacent living room lit up with a paused audio file, ready to play the conversation that would change everything forever. I looked at my dad and said, "Dad, I'm sorry you have to find out this way, but Catherine isn't who she says she is, and she doesn't love you. She's been scamming you from the beginning." Before anyone could interrupt, I hit play, and Catherine's voice filled the room from the speakers, crystal clear as she talked about targeting my dad, about his money, about how easy it was to manipulate a grieving widower. The color drained from everyone's faces as they heard her laugh about my father being stupid and discuss her plans to drain his accounts and disappear once she'd secured enough. My dad's face went from confused to horrified to absolutely shattered as he listened to the woman he loved reveal her true nature in her own words, completely unfiltered and undeniably damning. Catherine tried to run, actually bolted for the door, but my uncle was faster and blocked her path while demanding she sit down and explain herself. She started crying, claiming the recordings were taken out of context, that I'd somehow edited them or made them up because I was jealous of her relationship with my dad. But I was ready for that too, pulling up bank statements on the TV showing the transfers, the documents with her multiple identities, the divorce records from her previous husbands. One of my dad's friends, who happened to be a police officer off duty, started taking pictures of everything on his phone, while Catherine's protests became more desperate and less coherent. Her sister was crying, saying she'd warned Catherine to stop running her games, and that admission basically sealed Catherine's fate right there in front of everyone. The rest of Thanksgiving was a blur of police reports, lawyers being called, and Catherine being escorted out of our house in handcuffs after the officer friend called for backup. My dad sat in his chair like a statue, staring at nothing, processing the fact that the last 2 years of his life had been an elaborate lie designed to rob him blind. Family members didn't know what to do. Some tried to comfort my dad, others comforted me, and a few just awkwardly ate pie in the kitchen because they'd driven 3 hours to get there, and the turkey was really good despite the catastrophic drama. Catherine kept screaming at me as the police led her away, saying I'd ruined everything, that I was a vindictive little brat who couldn't handle his daddy being happy, completely dropping her sweet mother act in favor of showing everyone exactly who she really was underneath the mask. The weeks that followed were incredibly difficult as my dad struggled to come to terms with how thoroughly he'd been deceived by someone he trusted completely. He apologized to me about 1,000 times for not believing me when I'd expressed discomfort with Catherine's behavior, for choosing her demands over my feelings, for being so blinded by his own loneliness that he'd put us both at risk. We went to therapy together, talking through his grief over my mom, his guilt about moving on too quickly, and his shame about falling for Catherine's manipulation. The good news was that we caught her before she could do maximum damage. We recovered most of the stolen money, and the legal case against her was rock solid, thanks to all the evidence I'd gathered. She ended up pleading guilty to fraud, identity theft, and embezzlement, getting a 5-year prison sentence that hopefully would give her time to reconsider her life choices. My dad and I slowly rebuilt our relationship, stronger than before because we'd been through this crucible together and come out the other side. He put my mom's pictures back up around the house, and we started visiting her grave every Sunday, talking to her about our week and keeping her memory alive the way we should have been doing all along. Dad joined a real therapy group instead of those support groups where predators like Catherine apparently hunted for vulnerable marks, and he started actually processing his grief instead of trying to replace it with a new relationship. The how tough conversations about trust, about how to protect yourself from manipulation, and about how grief can make us vulnerable to people who see emotions as weaknesses to exploit rather than human experiences to respect. As for me, I learned that sometimes doing the right thing means making incredibly difficult choices that might hurt people you love in the short term, but protect them in the long run. The guilt I felt watching my dad's heart break all over again was crushing, but I knew that if I hadn't acted, my dad would have eventually lost everything: his savings, his house, and possibly even his relationship with me once Catherine convinced him to send me away. I became much more cautious about trusting people at face value, always looking for the motivation behind someone's actions rather than just accepting their words. My experience with Catherine taught me that some people are skilled actors who will exploit any vulnerability for personal gain, and that protecting yourself and your family isn't being cynical, it's being smart. The story made local news, and I even got contacted by other families who'd been targeted by Catherine or people like her, thanking me for exposing her and potentially saving them from similar situations. One man told me Catherine had been dating his father before she met my dad, but she dropped him when she found out his money was tied up in a trust. Another woman said Catherine had gone to college with her under a different name and had scammed multiple students with sob stories about needing money for fake emergencies. It turned out Catherine was a career con artist with a pattern going back at least 15 years, and my evidence helped build cases against her for multiple counts of fraud across different states. My relationship with my dad's family got stronger too, because they'd all witnessed Catherine's true nature firsthand and understood exactly why I'd been resistant to accepting her. My grandmother, my dad's mom, pulled me aside a few weeks after Thanksgiving and told me I'd probably saved my father's life in more ways than one, because Catherine's type of manipulation can lead to not just financial ruin, but complete psychological destruction. She said my real mom would be incredibly proud of how I'd protected our family, and honestly, that meant more to me than any other praise or recognition I received. Knowing that my mom would approve of my actions, even though they were difficult and painful, gave me peace about the whole situation. Looking back now, almost a year later, I can say that exposing Catherine was absolutely the right call, even though it wasn't easy and the aftermath was complicated. My dad is dating again, but this time he's taking it slow, being cautious, and actually listening when I express concerns instead of dismissing them as teenage angst. We've established boundaries about how he introduces new people into our lives, and he's promised never to let anyone try to replace my mom or push me to call them something I'm not comfortable with. Our house feels like home again, filled with genuine warmth instead of the fake performance-based happiness that Catherine manufactured to maintain her cover. The revenge part of this story isn't about me being vindictive, it's about justice for my father and protection for our family. Catherine spent 2 years manipulating, stealing, and planning to destroy us financially and emotionally, and facing the consequences of those actions isn't revenge, it's accountability. She made her choices, and I simply ensured that those choices caught up with her before she could complete her plan and disappear with my father's life savings. Some people called me harsh for exposing her so publicly, but I'd do it again in a heartbeat, because the alternative was watching my dad lose everything while I stayed silent out of fear or misplaced politeness. I've also become an advocate of sorts, talking to grief counseling groups about the dangers of predatory behavior in vulnerable spaces. My dad and I even started a small foundation to help families who've been victims of romance scams, providing legal resources and financial counseling to help them recover. Turning our painful experience into something that helps others has been healing in ways I didn't expect, giving purpose to all the anger and hurt that Catherine's betrayal caused. We've helped 12 families so far, and knowing that our worst experience is preventing others from going through the same thing makes the whole nightmare feel worth it. So that's my story, how a Thanksgiving dinner turned into a confrontation that exposed a con artist and saved my family from financial and emotional ruin. To anyone out there dealing with a manipulative step-parent or watching a parent get involved with someone who seems too good to be true, trust your instincts and document everything. You're not being paranoid or difficult if something feels wrong. You're being protective of the people you love. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do is expose a painful truth before it destroys everyone you care about, even if that means ruining a holiday dinner and facing some really uncomfortable conversations. If you made it this far, thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it helps someone out there who might be going through something similar. Remember that protecting your family isn't about being the hero, it's about being willing to do what's necessary even when it's hard, even when people might not understand at first, and even when the consequences are uncertain. My Thanksgiving revelation destroyed the fake family Catherine was building, but it saved the real family I still had with my dad, and that's what matters most. Don't let anyone make you feel guilty for honoring your real parents' memory or for refusing to accept a replacement just because it would make other people more comfortable. Your feelings matter, your family's protection matters, and sometimes the best revenge is simply ensuring that truth wins over deception.